This is ABtv, Animal Bites Television.
In the media, whether it's television, movies, or newsprint, typically a snake like this, a 19-foot reticulated python that's over 200 pounds, is going to be depicted as a killer. When someone sees someone like me that's just handling a big snake like this, they're thinking, he's crazy, he's going to get killed. And why that is because the media plays to our sensations, the fact that we fear snakes so much. Let's face it, a news story or a TV show or a movie about a rabbit killing somebody isn't going to sell, isn't going to get ratings, and isn't going to make headlines. But when you start talking about a 19-foot python that attacks someone or a king cobra that kills someone, that's going to sell newspapers. That's going to get you to tune into news media. But the truth is, it couldn't be further from the truth. So today, we're going to dove into the fact, are snakes killers, and what is the truth behind it? There are actually reports of 100,000 plus people a year worldwide that die from snake bites. But we need to dive into those numbers a little bit deeper to understand what that really means. And then I want to ask the question, how many people a year die from snakes in North America? While 100,000 people a year that die from snake bites seems like an insane number, the truth is the vast majority of snakes' deaths come from really third world countries like Sri Lanka, India, Africa, and that's for a couple reasons. One, those areas, especially the city populations, have encroached into the areas where these venomous snakes have large populations. Number two, they have really poor medical care. So oftentimes in a village, in a really remote area, in a third world country like Sri Lanka, they're not going to get the medical attention needed to save their life. Let's take, for example, Australia. Since the advent of anti-venin and the fact that they have a really first world medical system, there's hardly any deaths a year in Australia, although they have the top venomous snakes in the entire world. Because of their advanced medical care and the availability to anti-venom, they basically have no fatalities whatsoever. Although snakes get a bad rap as killers, the truth is they would rather run away than attack you. Hey! They're an extremely defensive animal, not an aggressive animal. They would rather flee and stay away from you. So almost all snake incidents, especially snake bites, happen because of a situation like you accidentally step on an animal, or as you're walking through the bush, you get too close and it feels threatened and it lashes out at you. And even worse sometimes is inexperienced people coming across a cobra or a rattlesnake or whatever type of snake, and they feel they've seen it on TV, they can pick that animal up, and then they get bitten by the animal. Again, snakes would much rather leave you alone than ever attack you. But accidents do happen. Take, for example, in July of 2015, an 18-year-old was bitten and killed by a cobra while transporting in a car. Oddly enough, 4 days later in Pennsylvania, a 39-year-old man was bitten by a rattlesnake and killed. Well, my thoughts go out to those victims and of course their families. The truth is, most of those incidents can be avoided just by practicing common sense. Again, snakes don't want to kill you, they don't want to bite you, they don't want to attack you, they do it only as a defense. So if you practice common sense, you can usually avoid any situation. Speaking of common sense, here's a weird one for you. Pen Fan is a restaurateur that was actually envenomated and killed by a decapitated head of a spitting cobra. That's right, a lot of people don't realize that even a decapitated snake head can still envenomate you and potentially deliver a fatal bite. Although I hate to compare apples and oranges, you're actually more likely to be killed by lightning, tripping and hitting your head, raw meat, coconut, champagne corks, ladders, icicles, beds, and vending machines rather than snakes. But what about large constrictors? Again, like I said at the beginning of this program, people think when you're handling a snake like this, you're gonna be in danger and you're gonna die. But this is the interesting thing. Believe it or not, since the mid-1970s, when people started keeping these as pets, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even millions of people keeping large constrictors, believe it or not, there's only been a few deaths. Now listen, I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say a few deaths is too much, and I agree with you on that. But the truth is that when you're talking about millions of encounters with these animals, and you're talking about only a few deaths, obviously, more people die from the most simple things in the world. So pythons really get a bad rap, and you can see this snake here is completely placid, and right now I'm in absolutely no danger whatsoever. Now, I'm not condoning everybody to own a large constrictor snake for sure, because you do need experience. You need to know a lot about these animals. Like my friend Kevin McCurley said, you know, an idiot with a ball python is a lot different than an idiot with a 20-foot reticulated python. But the truth is, when I go to educational shows with 5th graders, 4th graders, kindergartners, and I show an animal like this albino retic or my girl Sunshine, it's a showstopper. I mean, that's what they talk about the entire time. And they get excited and interested, and then they can focus, and then I can teach them things about wildlife. So I've been working with these large constrictor snakes for 30 years. I couldn't imagine life without them. But I tell you what, they sure are a workout. When the general public hears that you're keeping a pet python, the first thing that comes to their mind is that you're keeping this monster snake that can kill the neighborhood. But the truth is, the most common kept python as a pet, and one of the most common kept snakes as a pet, happens to be a ball python. That's right, these guys are pythons as well, you know, just like the big snakes. They're related to them, but this is as big as it gets right here. I mean, they hatch out at about 8 or 10 inches, really small, super docile, and this is it. They get roughly about 5 foot. A lot of them only stay 4.5 foot, as a matter of fact. And they get relatively heavy bodied, but as you can see, you know, when people are thinking a python and they're thinking this 200+ pound beast of an animal, and the fact is the vast majority of people that keep pythons keep this animal right here, a ball python, that certainly cannot harm anybody. Certainly isn't going to harm a baby. It's not going to harm a cat. It's not going to harm a dog. It's just a beautiful animal. But you know what's interesting is that it's not the only python. There's tons of smaller pythons. As a matter of fact, probably more small python species than the giant python species. And let me show you this one right here. This is pretty interesting. This is an Australian python named a children's python, which is very similar to spotted pythons and Simpson's pythons, and they all get roughly about this size. That's right, this is an adult python right here, and as a matter of fact, an animal that's very closely related to this, called the anthill python, is the smallest python in the world, and they get about maybe 50 to 60% of the size. So again, when you're thinking about pythons, it's not always the monster pythons. As a matter of fact, the more common are the smaller pythons like these guys. Take, for instance, corn snakes. They're not a python or a boa, but they're one of the most common pet snakes in all of the world, and that's because they're extremely docile, they're really placid animals, and they don't get large. I mean, even a large animal is maybe 5 foot and only about that big around. This happens to be a 1.5-year-old snake right here, and as you can see, completely docile, and they don't get large, so you don't have to worry about them ever eating your household cat, which, by the way, never really happens with snakes. People ask me all the time, will my cat be okay? And I always say a cat is more dangerous to a snake than a snake is to a cat. A couple more examples of really commonly kept pet snakes, and again, when people think of snakes, a lot of times they think of really large animals. This is a king snake right here. It happens to be a California king snake, and again, this is a very commonly kept pet snake. As you can see, this is a full-grown adult, and they just eat mice, you know, and as a matter of fact, they eat frozen mice, so it's not like you're even throwing a live mouse in there. And again, a lot of times people just get that wrong misconception. They think, oh, you're keeping snakes, you must be a freak or something like that. The truth is, a lot of these things are really just this small, super docile, and really cool animals. Another one that's really cool would be an albino garter snake. And this is kind of a good animal for someone that, let's say, doesn't want to feed mice, you know, because maybe they just are against that, or they don't want to feed frozen stuff, keep stuff in the freezer. Because although we do feed mice to our garter snakes, there's plenty of species of garter snakes that will eat, you know, fish, worms, and even frozen frogs or something on that line. So if you want a pet snake that only gets this big, is really beautiful and extremely docile, not to mention pretty darn intelligent. Garter snakes are really an intelligent snake. That's a good example of an animal that might be a good option for you. I have spent my life trying to change people's perception of these often misunderstood animals. The truth is, anything that you mess with in your course of your day, whether you're driving a car, you're cooking, you're doing anything, there's always going to be danger. And I'm not saying that snakes are not dangerous at all, because in the right situation, you can certainly get hurt. But the truth is, as long as you respect them, just like you would respect your dog or your cat, you're really in no danger. These animals are absolutely gorgeous and completely misunderstood, and I'm on a mission to change that. I hope you guys have enjoyed this and learned something about snakes as much as I have. And as always, I was Facebooking and tweeting my way through things. So make sure to follow me over at SnakeBytesTV and on Instagram at SnakeBytes.tv. Until next week, you've been watching Snake Bites.